Hello and welcome to another episode of Sustainability in Your Ear, Earth911's podcast. And we are speaking today with Dr. Katrina-Cornish, who is the scientific advisor for American Rubber Company, which is, well, we get a lot of interesting phone calls and requests for interviews, but this is the first time somebody said we're reinventing natural rubber. Katrina, welcome to the program. Tell us about natural rubber and what you are doing with American Rubber Company.
American Sustainable Rubber Company is a new company that does hydroponic rubber production. Now, the reason we're doing this is that natural rubber is a very unappreciated but really important material. Mm-hmm. For example, we import over 1 million tons for our manufacturing needs out of a 13 million ton supply. There's over 50,000 different things made with natural rubber. And it's still here instead of the synthetic rubber because it does things that synthetic rubbers can't do. And of course, it's sustainable. Synthetic rubber production at the moment puts up something like 90 million metric tons of CO2 a year, whereas plant-based natural rubber doesn't do that. However, the big problem is that all of the natural rubber currently comes from the tropically grown Brazilian rubber tree, most from Southeast Asia. Now, there's a deforestation moratorium because we can't keep cutting down rainforests to plant rubber trees.
Right.
And it's also extremely genetically narrow. For miles upon miles, it's exactly the same clonal scion on seedling rootstocks, so very prone to crop failure. So we really need to have in the US and in the developed world in general, natural rubber producing crops.
Now, you've taken a very different direction, one that's surprising. You have genetically modified a dandelion. The tk-dandelion strain is what it's called. Tell us, how did you do that? What was involved in engineering this new output from the plant?
Well, we use both genetic engineering, but also most of our effort is in actually gene editing, which is a targeted mutagenesis. So people might have heard of CRISPR-Cas9, that type of approach where you're just modifying a gene the plant already has instead of putting in a gene from a different species. So we had to develop a whole bunch of enabling technologies. So TK tissue culture, transformation methods. One of my students came up with a very clever way of using root transformation because the reason your dandelions in your lawn keep coming back is because roots can grow shoots. Now,
Sure. Most
species can't do that. Most species you can put roots on your shoots, but you can't do it the other way around. So that's a very useful, efficient way of doing these gene editing and genetically modified approaches. And what we're looking at in those are both domestication traits like herbicide resistance or herbicide tolerance so that you can control weeds in a field, but there's still a long way to go. And we're also doing sending the carbon that the plant absorbs to the rubber pathway instead of, say, to storage carbohydrate. We don't particularly want the plant to be able to overwinter, because it will really help us prevent it becoming weedy when we've made a really big, vigorous one. Now, what we also did, though, was look at this in a hydroponic system. And what we found there was that this plant really likes hydroponics, especially if there's a lot of air. We developed a flow system at OSU here. And then you can grow enormous amounts of roots, and then you could cut them off and grow them back down again from the same plant. So this means that you can have several harvests of the same plant in a single year, whereas in a field-grown TK dandelion, you've got one harvest and smaller roots, to be fair. So we partnered then with American Sustainable Rubber Company because they are very much into vertical farming and controlled environment farming. And we want to be able to have several levels then of hydroponic dandelions. So not only can we harvest them multiple times in a year, we can have several different, and that makes for a much higher density per acre than you could possibly get in a field. So this makes for a much more productive rubber system than is available on a field crop, and also allows us to develop new germplasm and optimize fertigation practices that might eventually be directly applicable to the field situation. And then the really huge thing is there's no weeds in a hydroponic system. If you think about this being a dandelion cousin, how do you kill the dandelions without killing the dandelions? So it does mean weed control in the field is challenging, and we avoid that. And we also avoid soil. So the rubber is clean.
Now you have are you actually building and running the 190-acre indoor growth facility now, or is that part of your future plans?
That's part of the future plan. We have a small pilot that's going in at the moment, mm-hmm. both the OSU research system and then a vertical farming type pilot system that we will optimize to match or exceed the performance of the research system that did really well. So we want to make sure that the vertical farming doesn't get expanded out until it can do as well as the research system.
And it also sounds like one of the concerns with genetically modified crops is that they could get out in the wild, but by doing this indoors and then mastering the plant before you take it outdoors sounds like a very judicious approach to genetic engineering of crops. Is that a benefit of this?
Yes, that's a very large benefit. But then, to be fair, we also really took that seriously because my first PhD student at OSU, his entire thesis was looking at those gene flow implications in field-grown tk-dandelions. Could something jump from that species into common dandelion and become an ecological mess? Well, the answer to that is it's extraordinarily unlikely. We did a survey of global dandelions, asked our friends to send us seed and GPS coordinates, and checked what source of dandelions they were in the common dandelion. And all of the North American dandelions that we looked at were all what's called a triploid apomix. And what that means is the mother, all her children are exact clones of her. Mm-hmm. They cannot accept pollen from the TK dandelions. So pollen-mediated gene flow is not possible.
You are the chair of bioemergent materials at the Ohio State University and have 20 patents to your name already. What made you look at a dandelion and think, wow, I can get rubber out of that?
Oh, well, this was actually what I was hired into OSU to really do. A lot of my previous work had been in guayule and the circumallergenic latex, allergy-safe latex and fuel from the guayule shrub from the Chihuahuan Desert. Now, the OSU had a program that had been funded under the Third Frontier in Ohio, and they needed someone to come in and really help get that program in dandelion off the starting blocks. In the emergency rubber project of World War II, the leading contenders for alternate natural rubber were guayule, rubber dandelion, and also there was a project in Madagascar rubber vine in Haiti. So this is already known to make a really nice rubber that's very similar to rubber from the tropical rubber tree. Okay. And it can be grown in the northern states like Ohio. So it has real potential to become a significant either indoor or outdoor crop for Ohio farmers and producers. And of course, the rubber industry is here too. Now, guayule you can't grow in Ohio. This is a desert plant. It's much too wet and too cold here for that plant. So dandelion is the leading contender for a domestic source of rubber in the northern United States.
Now, the amount of rubber that we import is worth about $1.6 billion a year, and we don't, at this point, make any rubber at scale in the United States. How, you mentioned some of the environmental benefits of doing this, but let's talk a little about the material security involved in moving rubber production into the United States. We can lose access to rubber for a variety of natural reasons like drought, but it also can become a geopolitical tool. Yes. And you just mentioned it and not occurred to me that, of course, Firestone and many of the tire companies are based in Ohio. Is this an important investment for the United States as it moves into the next generation of the economy?
I think it's absolutely critical because we know that rubber supplies are going to become restricted. Prices are already starting to go up a little bit. They'll get more so. As the world develops further, the amount of natural rubber we need will be at least double what we need now. And so you're talking about, just amazingly enormous amounts. We're heading towards at least African elephant weight's worth of rubber every second. That's a lot of tapping into a tiny little cup, Yeah. So, and we're not that popular. So if somebody is going to say, okay, if China needs more rubber, they're right there. They're going to probably buy it rather than us getting it. Mm-hmm. And the critical nature of it, people don't have large stockpiles anymore. The US doesn't have a stockpile at all. But if you remember the big tsunami that affected Thailand so badly a few years ago, that cut off rubber supplies. And so there was some real hurt in the US for some time there for people who didn't have stockpiles and were relying on regular shipments. And of course, this is the opposite side of the world. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to produce rubber and eventually not only become self-sustaining, but become a rubber exporting country to both supplement the natural rubber supply and also provide alternative natural rubber materials that have performance advantages over the existing material. And the other issue that we're really concerned about is that Southeast Asian rubber trees are not resistant to South American leaf blight, which is called salb. This fatal fungal disease of the Hevea brasiliensis rubber tree. And so if that gets a hold in Southeast Asia, we could lose the whole industry in just a year or two.
Because it's a monoculture.
It's a monoculture, and it's all sensitive. And these plantations are grown. The trees are like 8 feet apart, so their canopies are all mixed, their roots are all mixed. So it's people who've seen leaf blight go through a plantation have written about it. They say it's like fire, slow-moving fire. The leaves turn black and drop off, and the tree dies. So this is a very realistic thing will happen. When you think how Dutch elm disease destroyed the elms, and they were not genetically narrow. And live oaks, emerald ash borer, aren't all growing next to each other and aren't genetically narrow. So the Hevea trees are tremendously at risk, and it's an incredibly important raw material for which there is no replacement.
Right.
So the higher the performance of the tire, for example, the greater the percentage of natural rubber. Even a regular car tire, 50% is natural rubber in many tires and 50% synthetic. There's other things in the tire, but that polymer ratio. And big earth-moving ones, they're 100%. Most commercial airlines, the tires are 100% natural. So
now, and does rubber recycling scale up to complement this, or is rubber always something you need virgin material for?
You're never going to be able to get away from virgin material. There's a small percentage of depolymerized rubber or using ground up tires as a filler, things like this. Recycle a bit of it, but you're never going to be able to, you won't be putting those materials into airplane tires, for example.
Now, when do you expect that we'll have a significant portion of U.S. rubber being grown and produced domestically? Is it? Well,
that is going to be quite some time, because the issue of scalability is a huge challenge in any new crop development. See, the big tire companies, they don't want to pay more for the rubber that they use.
Sure.
They can't compete in a commodity market on a small scale because you have no economies of scale. So we have to target the rubber from ASR, American Sustainable Rubber, or from our other partners to premium markets. And of course, the Dandelion rubber is very similar to Hevea rubber. So we're going with a very clean. We haven't got a full characterization yet of exactly what that rubber looks like in a hydroponically produced rubber. So we're going to be looking at that really carefully this year in the hopes to find some advantages so it could target more premium markets. And we won't be going to tires for years and years. Now, that being said, the tire companies have all demonstrated they can make lovely tires from Dandelion rubber and from guayule rubber. But it's okay. Now, where's my order a few 100,000 tons? But I said, well, you can't actually order a few 100,000 tons. We have to scale it, and we have to be able to pay for it while we scale it. So we have to have enough profits that we can build the next control environment vertical farm, or that we can pay for the new processing plant with greater capacity. So all of that has to be funded as you expand. And it's a very complicated situation, but it's worth doing. And I think we must do it before we actually end up back in like 1880, with no rubber things.
Well, and one of the your company is a subsidiary of United American Healthcare Corporation, and obviously there's a great deal of rubber and latex use in medical supplies and equipment.
Yes.
Is that where you expect this will be discovered by consumers first?
Well, I think that's one possibility, but I also like the idea of sporting goods. So shoes, sports shoes, grip, basketballs, things like this, where you're not paying the same low price that you would for tire rubber. So I think staying out of the hands to start with of FDA, so you don't have to go through that regulatory path. That you can get some safety data, general use to start with. That would be the ideal thing to do from my perspective. And
it would be lovely to see sustainable basketballs. Yes,
absolutely. Yes, and we need to get one of the big stars to say, we want one made from dandelion. And their shoes too,
That's great. That's great. And you're describing obviously an industry that can grow up in what the Rust Belt and replace industries which are obviously going offshore or dying. And
yes.
So that's fantastic. Now,
and we also think that you'll be able to get a lot of rural development here too, because you don't want to be transporting large bales of roots all over the place,
right.
So you want your initial rubber extraction close to where you're actually doing your production.
So this could be a distributed industry.
Yes, and then the manufacturing industries would still stay not distributed, but the material production industry could be distributed.
Now, let me ask a slightly different question. For younger people thinking about entering the material sciences industries today, how big an opportunity do you see that as compared to considering going into computer technology? Is this potentially a bigger growth area?
I think at the moment it's a huge potential growth area, because we all need to have the sustainable materials. We need to have the compostable materials. We need to be able to work how you're going to deal with end of life issues for your materials, or the things that your materials have gone into. There's only so much space on the planet to put rubbish bins.
Sure.
So yes, I think lightweight materials. We're working with other groups, on like sustainable building materials. And one of the things that we really try and do is not try and go all the way to 100% replacement. So some of our materials research is done with partial replacement of carbon black or bifunctionalized silica with bio-based or sustainable fillers, like eggshell-derived fillers, things of that nature, where you can get really good properties, but you don't have to do 100% replacement. A 70% replacement is still really good.
Sure. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the practical.
Yes, exactly. So where can we start putting them in, and then you make the gains. But it's all around material performance and understanding what features of your raw material, how they impact the performance of your final material, your final product,
That's fascinating to think about. You can look at the world in a completely different way when you think into the molecular structure of how something is constructed.
Yes. And then how does that react? Which bit of that macromolecular structure is reacting with your filler particle? And how to improve that? Or do you want to improve it? And what we're also seeing is you can get novel combinations of properties. So if you use these different sorts of materials or different sorts of ingredients, you could start to see things that people haven't seen before.
Right.
So you might say, okay, I want something that's going to be really stretchy, but it's also stiff in a sense. So you instead of if you're going to be stretchy, you're going to be soft. Well, not necessarily. There's
or stiff in one direction.
Yes. Right. So you can make you find different things. Natural rubber has, almost all the research until recent years has really been in the Hevea rubber. But there's 2,500 species that make natural rubber. It's just been grandfathered in,
wow.
And it's just this particular one. And it's like starch, rice starch is not the same as wheat starch, is not the same as potato starch. That's what well, all the rubbers are a little bit different from each other. So they're all natural rubber, but just think about the different material properties that you would be able to develop if you only understood what those differences mean in terms of material application.
It's stunning that we settled on one source of rubber.
Yes, and it's so genetically now. It all comes from about 15 trees that were smuggled out of Brazil through Kew Gardens by Henry Wickham and planted in the country. It was Ceylon at the time, in Sri Lanka. And then nearly all the plantations are directly descended from that very small group of group of plants. And then, as I say, they're all grown as bud graft clones on seedling rootstocks. So that really compounds their original extreme narrowness.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I've been on rubber plantations in Malaysia and had no idea that it wasn't something that was a native plant, because no one would have pointed that out. They simply talked about their crop.
They come from the Amazon. The reason they don't die of leaf blight there is, you're in the jungle. Here's a hevea tree, and then there's 200 other trees before you get to the next hevea tree. Mm-hmm. When you grow them, if you grow them there in a whole group, that's what Henry Ford tried to do. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Fordlandia, but this was a major plantation. It was wiped out by leaf blight.
Well, Katrina, thank you very much for your time. We've been speaking with Dr. Katrina-Cornish of American Sustainable Rubber Company. How can people keep track of what you're up to?
Well, my day job at the Ohio State University, we have a website that can be accessed very easily. I'm very findable. And then as a scientific advisor to ASR, they have a website.
And it's at AmericanRubber.com.
Yes, yes. And so they certainly are. And then I also have my own startup company, which is Energene Inc. And so that's Guayule latex company, that one. And so, yes, there's it's easy to find me. You could just type my name into Google, and you'll find me pretty easily.
Well, thank you, Dr. Katrina-Cornish. Folks, look her up and keep track of this, because this is an amazing innovation. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And this is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we will be back with another episode soon. Stay tuned, everybody, and have a good day.